The garden was dark, torches moving through the trees, soldiers with swords and clubs, and a man walking ahead of them all, not with a weapon, not with an accusation, but with something far more precise. He knew exactly where Jesus would be. He had been there before, many times, with the others. He walked toward Jesus, and he extended his hands, and he kissed him. "Rabbi." And Jesus, who knew everything, who had seen everything coming, looked at the man whose hands had just delivered him to his enemies and said one word: "Friend." Stop. The man who had just destroyed him, Jesus still called friend. Then the narration pulls back. 3 years earlier, this man was chosen by the same voice that just called him friend. And somewhere between that choosing and this garden, something happened. This is not the story of the night Judas betrayed Jesus. It is the story of the 3 years that made that night possible. When did Judas stop being a disciple? He was not chosen last. He was not chosen reluctantly. He was not the disciple Jesus tolerated while preferring the others. Judas Iscariot was called by name, the same way Peter was called, the same way John was called, the same way all 12 were called. And when Jesus sent them out 2 by 2 to preach, to heal, to cast out demons, Judas went. He carried the same authority. He spoke the same message. He worked the same miracles. For 3 years he walked the same roads, heard the same teachings, sat at the same table, watched the same blind men see, the same lame men walk, the same dead men breathe again. He was there for all of it. And no one suspected him. The night Jesus announced that one of them would betray him, the disciples looked at each other. Each one asked, "Is it I?" Not one of them looked at Judas. Not one of them said his name. Because Judas had become so indistinguishable from the others, so fully present, so completely credible, that his transformation was invisible. This is not the story of a man who was always different. This is the story of a man who became someone else so gradually that no one saw it happening, not even those closest to him. The change did not happen in one moment. It never does. John reveals the first detail quietly, almost in passing. Judas kept the money bag. He was the treasurer, the one entrusted with everything the group had, and he helped himself to what was inside, not once, regularly. This is where the story of Judas becomes the story of every man, because the great falls in Scripture and in human life almost never begin with the great sins. They begin with the small ones, with the habits installed in darkness, with the compromises normalized over time, with the doors opened one by one while telling yourself they lead nowhere dangerous. Judas did not decide to betray Jesus one morning. He had been opening doors, quietly, for a long time. His hands had grown accustomed to taking what was not his. And while those hands were reaching into the money bag, another pair of hands was moving toward him. This is the movement most people miss, because they watch Judas. But the text shows something else happening simultaneously. Jesus was watching too, and he knew from the beginning. John says it plainly. Jesus knew from the beginning who would betray him. From the beginning, which means every moment of the 3 years, every teaching, every meal, every road walked together, Jesus knew. And he chose Judas anyway. He sent him out to preach anyway. He trusted him with the money bag anyway. He sat beside him anyway. And then, the night before everything ended, Jesus did something that the text records without commentary, without explanation, without asking the reader to feel anything in particular. It simply says what happened. Jesus got up from the table. He took off his outer garment. He wrapped a towel around his waist. He poured water into a basin, and he knelt down. And he took the feet of his disciples, one by one, and he washed them. He came to Judas. He knelt. He reached out his hands, and he held the feet of the man who had already agreed on a price. The water, the silence, the hands of the one being stolen from, wrapped around the feet of the one who would betray him. This was not ignorance. This was not weakness. This was pursuit. Jesus was not moving toward Judas to expose him. He was moving toward him one last time to give him a reason to turn back. Every gesture of grace was a door Jesus was leaving open, while Judas was closing others.
6 days before Passover, Bethany.
A woman enters with an alabaster jar of perfume, enormously expensive, and breaks it open over Jesus. The room fills with the scent, and a voice rises in objection. "Why this waste? This could have been sold for a great sum and given to the poor." John names the voice, Judas. His hands had counted money for 3 years. He knew the price of everything. And here was something being poured out with no return, no calculation, no control. Jesus defends the woman publicly and turns the correction directly toward Judas. Matthew places the very next scene immediately after, not days later, not after further reflection, immediately. Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" They counted out 30 pieces of silver, and they placed them in his hands. The text connects these two moments deliberately. The woman gave everything she had without calculation. Judas calculated the price of everything he had been given and sold it. But 30 pieces of silver was not simply a number. It was a detail that had been written long before Judas was born. Centuries before this night, the prophet Zechariah had written something extraordinary. "So they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, 'Throw it to the potter,' the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord, to the potter." 30 pieces of silver, the potter's field, the money thrown into the temple. Every detail written centuries before the night Judas walked into the house of the chief priests. And this is where the tension at the heart of this story becomes impossible to avoid. If every detail was prophesied, if the exact amount was written, if the potter's field was predetermined, then was any of this ever Judas's choice? And if it wasn't his choice, how can he be condemned for it? Hold that question, because the answer is not simple, and the text does not pretend it is. The Last Supper, Jesus and his 12, and Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." The room falls into confusion, each disciple asking, "Is it I?" Jesus takes a piece of bread, he dips it, and he hands it to Judas. In the culture of that table, this was a gesture of honor, of distinction, of intimacy. One final door held open. And John records what happened next. After he received the morsel, Satan entered into him. Not before the bread, after it. After the last gesture of grace, the door closes from the inside. God does not create a traitor. He confirms the direction of a man who has already chosen his path, one small door at a time. And then Jesus says something that stops everything. What you are going to do quickly. Not stop, not there is still time, not I am asking you to choose differently. Do it quickly. Judas stood, and he walked out into the night. And John adds 2 words that are never simply a timestamp in his gospel. And it was night. That same night, While Judas was completing what he had set in motion, Peter was failing too. 3 times. A servant girl, a fire in a courtyard. 3 denials. I do not know him. I do not know him. I do not know him. 2 men, the same night, both of them falling, both of them watching what happened next, both of them realizing what they had done, both of them weeping. Now read what each man did with his grief. Judas went to the chief priests. He threw the 30 pieces of silver onto the temple floor. He said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. He confessed. He named his sin. He returned the money. On the surface, Judas's response looks more complete than Peter's. Peter wept. Judas confessed and returned everything. And yet, Peter came back, and Judas did not. The difference was not in the depth of the failure. The difference was in the direction of the return. Peter turned back toward Jesus. Judas turned back toward the men who had used him. And they said, What is that to us? See to it yourself. The hands that had counted silver threw it all away and walked out empty.
This is the real question. Not, why did Judas betray Jesus? But, why didn't Judas come back? Because the text gives no indication that returning was impossible. Peter returned after denying 3 times. The disciples returned after fleeing in the garden. The thief on the cross returned in his final breath. What stopped Judas was not the magnitude of his failure. It was his conclusion about it. He believed his story was over. He believed he had gone too far. He believed that what he had done had placed him beyond the reach of the one he had betrayed. And that belief was the final door he closed. Not the betrayal, the belief that the betrayal was the end. For 3 years, a grace pursued a man who was walking away from it. It chose him knowing what he would do. It washed his feet. It handed him the bread. It called him friend in the garden at the moment of the kiss, when it would have been completely justified to say nothing at all. When did Judas stop being a disciple? Perhaps the more honest question is, did Jesus ever stop pursuing him? The Bible never records Jesus withdrawing the word friend. It only records Judas walking away from it.